Hey there, Mini Course. It's Ms. Taylor. With a variety of skulls I have checked out from the Museum of Anthropology. So, since we can't meet in person to investigate the different artifacts from the museum, I'll be sharing them with you by video over the next couple days. So, for Friday, March 20th, your discussion board post will be about this video on skulls. So yes, they are to scale and they're arranged in order of least to most modern. So this guy here, this is the only one that's a real skull, but it is a real skull and it's a modern human. So we'll work our way up to that, but let's travel back through time to the very origins of mankind on the continent of Africa. What we have here, this guy is Australopithecus afarensis. They lived in Eastern Africa, so modern countries of Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. And if you have heard about the Lucy skeleton, that very first, sometimes use the term humanoid, human-like beings. These guys lived 3.85 to 2.95 million years ago in Eastern Africa. Their proportions were a bit more in common with apes than with us, although you can see this is not too terribly dissimilar from humans. The skull's shaped a little bit differently. We've changed a lot, humans have. They have very strong strong arms and curved fingers. Are adapted to climbing trees. But their body could stand and walk upright on arched feet. And we'll be talking in the discussion board about why walking upright, that means on two legs instead of four, is so important to humans and helped us develop into, well, the humans that we are today. So this is Australopithecus afarensis, living in Eastern Africa between 3.85 and 2.95 million years ago. And you'll notice that some of the time periods do overlap. Some of these guys were living at the same time as others. So we're going to move forward in time a little bit here to Homo habilis, this skull here. Homo habilis was on the earth between 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago, found in Eastern and Southern Africa. The name Homo habilis actually means handyman, and it was given because when it was discovered at Olduvai Gorge in the early 1960s, this species was thought to represent the first stone toolmaker, and we'll have a later video on stone tools used by prehistoric people. Currently, the oldest stone tools are dated slightly older than the oldest evidence of the genus Homo, to which this guy belongs. So we're constantly learning new things through anthropology and archaeology and finding artifacts and remains. So initially we thought this was the first user of stone tools, but we found out that the use of stone tools predates the Homo habilis species. So we are moving on now to Homo erectus, 1.8 million years ago to 143,000 years ago. These guys could be found in northern, eastern, and southern Africa, Western Asia, and East Asia. So, kind of got these sort of humanoid folks traveling now and spreading on the globe. We'll be doing some talking about maps in future posts too. But this is the Homo erectus skull. So looking a lot more like modern humans, but still you can see some differences here just in the way the skull is shaped. If you can't quite see the difference here, you're going to notice it as we move along. So there we are, Homo erectus, our ancestors. This species is commonly known as Homo erectus, but some of the oldest African specimens are thought to represent a related species, Homo ergaster. There is evidence that individuals of Homo erectus were the first early humans to make hearths, to have fires with hearths, and to eat significant amounts of animal meat and bone marrow, and to care for the old and weak. It is the longest lived species on our family tree, surviving more than 9 times as long as our own species has so far, which is super, super interesting. And so that is Homo erectus. And we're moving on now to Homo neanderthalensis, who lived between 200,000 to 28,000 years ago, which is kind of a blip in time away from us by the time we get to this point. These guys lived in Europe, Southwestern, and Central Asia. These are the folks that are making the cave paintings, like we talked about, and you should definitely check out the resources related to Cave of Forgotten Dreams on the post for Sticks, Stones, and Bones this week. So these guys, their defining features of the skull include the large middle part of the face, angled cheekbones, and a huge nose for humidifying and warming cold, dry air. And you can see not only is the skull bigger, but those proportions are larger. Compare it to some of the ones that came before. You can kind of see that difference, right? Even in a video. Their bodies were shaped for heat conservation with shorter limb extremities. They lived in colder climates, or climates that would get colder than some of these earlier species. And so they had some physical adaptations for that. They're the first early humans to wear clothing. And that was necessary because they lived in glacial environments, glaciers, ice. And they may have been the first early human species to have language, bury their dead, and exhibit symbolic behavior. Again, thinking about those cave paintings that we've found from these people. And this skull is really large. You should have seen in your reading about these guys that large skull means that their intelligence was kind of similar to ours, although they would have exhibited it in different ways. But that big brain and that big head are not good for energy conservation and ultimately weren't super great for their survival, and they had to make some evolutionary adjustments. And look how much smaller this skull is. Homo sapiens lives, this is the early Homo sapiens, and then here's a modern Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens sapiens. You can see some difference in the shape of the skull, which would indicate the shape of the brain inside. So these early ones, between 200,000 years ago, they evolved in Africa, but they're now worldwide because, we are humans. Fossils and genetic evidence show that our species, Homo sapiens, evolved out of Africa about 200,000 years ago and began to spread out from there by at least 100,000 years ago. We now live in all parts of the world and are the sole surviving species of our once diverse family tree. And so this then is the modern Homo sapiens. A little bit different from the older one, but still very, very similar. You can actually see a lot of things here. Those of you who've been studying anatomy and wondering why babies have more bones, here's some evidence of that. Your skull is fused. By the time you're your age, and certainly by the time you're my age, this is an adult skull and it's fused. Look, those would have been separate bones, separate bone plates, and they're now fused. And when you open up the skull, there, you can see inside all that room for brain. And there's where your brainstem would go right there. Gives you a sense of just how much capacity there is in your head for brain and for your thinking. So there again, there's our journey through time from the very oldest skull to the species that we are now, to then the most modern version of that. Go on over to the discussion board and talk a little bit about this. What do you think?